Hey everyone, welcome to Midnight Mystic Stories. I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It really helps the channel grow and helps us keep bringing more of the content you love. And be sure to comment below where you are tuning in from. Thank you and enjoy the video. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but matching with Liam on Tinder felt different. I'd been on the app for a solid year, wading through the predictable swamp of gym selfies, fishing pictures, and guys whose opening line was some variation of "Hey, winky face." Liam's profile was refreshingly sparse. One picture, a slightly blurry shot of him leaning against a brick wall, face partially obscured by shadow. His bio was even more intriguing, looking for someone to explore the forgotten corners with. I rolled my eyes, but something about the vague poetry of it piqued my interest. I swiped right. He matched almost instantly. Our initial conversations were surprisingly deep. He wasn't interested in surface-level small talk. Instead, he wanted to know about my fears, my dreams, the things that kept me up at night. He asked about my favorite ghost stories, if I believed in the paranormal, and if I ever felt like I was being watched. It was intense, unsettling even, but I was drawn to it. Maybe I was bored with the mundane. Maybe I was looking for something more. Or maybe I was just naive enough to ignore the red flags waving frantically in my face. We talked for a week before deciding to meet. He suggested a place I'd never heard of, a secluded park on the outskirts of the city rumored to be haunted. "Perfect," he said, when I hesitantly agreed. "We can explore the forgotten corners together." I should have backed out then. I should have listened to the voice in the back of my head screaming that this was a terrible idea. But I didn't. I was intrigued, curious, and perhaps a little bit flattered that someone so unconventional was interested in me. The park was even more desolate than I imagined. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows across the overgrown paths. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. Liam was already waiting for me at the entrance, leaning against a gnarled oak tree. He was taller than I expected, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to absorb the fading light. He was wearing a long, dark coat that looked out of place in the mild weather. He greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm glad you came," he said, his voice low and husky. "I have something to show you." He led me deeper into the park, away from the main paths and towards a dense thicket of trees. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just a little further," he replied, his grip on my arm tightening slightly. "I promise it's worth it." We eventually arrived at a clearing. In the center stood an old, dilapidated mausoleum, its stone walls covered in moss and graffiti. The iron gate was rusted and hanging open, inviting us inside. "This is it," Liam said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "This is one of the forgotten corners." I hesitated. The mausoleum was creepy, unsettling, and everything about it screamed, "Stay away." But Liam was already heading towards the entrance, and I didn't want to seem like a scaredy cat. I followed him inside. The air inside the mausoleum was cold and damp. The only light came from the sliver of moon visible through the broken roof. Sarcophagi lined the walls, their stone lids cracked and crumbling. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Liam said, his voice echoing in the confined space. "It's interesting," I replied, trying to sound more enthusiastic than I felt. He started pacing around the mausoleum, running his hands along the sarcophagi. "Do you know who's buried here?" he asked. "No," I said. "I didn't even know this place existed until you told me about it." "These are the remains of the Blackwood family," he said, his voice taking on a theatrical tone. "They were the founders of this city, wealthy industrialists who made their fortune in coal mining. But their wealth came at a price. They say they made a pact with the devil to achieve their success." "A pact with the devil?" I scoffed. "That's just a story." "Is it?" Liam said, turning to face me. His eyes were glowing in the dim light. "Or is it a warning?" He started telling me more about the Blackwood family, about their dark secrets, their hidden rituals, and the rumors of madness and death that plagued them. He spoke with such conviction, such passion, that it was hard not to believe him. "They say the spirits of the Blackwood family still haunt this place," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "that they're trapped here, forever bound to this mausoleum." I shivered, despite myself. "You don't really believe that, do you?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, ornate box. He opened it, revealing a collection of strange objects: a dried flower, a lock of hair, a small bone, and a tarnished silver locket. "These belong to the Blackwood family," he said, his eyes fixated on the objects. "They're imbued with their energy, their essence." He picked up the silver locket and held it out to me. "Here," he said. "Hold it. Feel the energy." I hesitated. The locket looked old and sinister. I didn't want to touch it, but Liam's gaze was intense, hypnotic. I reluctantly took the locket from him. As soon as my fingers brushed against the cold metal, I felt a jolt of energy surge through my body. It was like an electric shock, both exhilarating and terrifying. I gasped and dropped the locket to the ground. "What was that?" I asked, my voice trembling. Liam smiled. "You felt it, didn't you?" he said. "The power of the Blackwood family." He picked up the locket and placed it back in the box. "They're still here," he said, his voice barely audible. "They're watching us." I wanted to leave. I wanted to run as far away from that mausoleum as possible. But I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. Suddenly, the temperature in the mausoleum dropped dramatically. A gust of wind swept through the broken roof, extinguishing the moonlight and plunging us into darkness. The air grew heavy, suffocating. I could hear whispers all around me, faint and unintelligible, but growing louder with each passing second. "They're here," Liam said, his voice filled with awe. "They've come to greet us." I screamed. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a vortex. I felt a cold hand touch my arm, and then another on my face. I tried to pull away, but I was surrounded by unseen forces. Liam was laughing, a high-pitched, manic laugh that echoed through the mausoleum. "Welcome," he shouted, his voice distorted and unnatural. "Welcome to the Blackwood family." I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the worst. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The whispers faded, the cold dissipated, and the moonlight returned. The air cleared, and I could breathe again. I opened my eyes. Liam was standing in front of me, his face pale and sweaty. The box was gone. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice sounding strangely normal. I didn't answer. I was too terrified to speak. He reached out to touch me, but I flinched away. "What was that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What just happened?" He looked confused. "What do you mean?" he said. "Nothing happened. We were just exploring the mausoleum." "No." I wish someone had warned me about the echoes. Not the echoes of footsteps in a dark alley, or the echoes of a scream in an empty house, but the echoes of profiles, the digital remnants of people I'd swiped past, faces that would resurface in the oddest, most unsettling ways, long after I'd forgotten they existed. See, Tinder had become a bit of a habit during a particularly lonely summer after a bad breakup. I wasn't necessarily looking for love, just distraction, a fleeting connection, a validation that I wasn't invisible. You know, the usual stuff. I swiped right on almost everyone. Dumb, I know. Quantity over quality was my motto, a desperate attempt to fill the void with notifications and lukewarm conversations. Most of those matches fizzled out after a few messages, a testament to the superficiality of the whole endeavor. Some led to awkward dates, where I realized the carefully curated online persona was nothing like the person sitting across from me. But they all faded eventually, lost in the endless scroll of potential matches. Or so I thought. It started subtly. A face I vaguely recognized in a crowd, a fleeting glimpse on the street. Nothing concrete, just a nagging feeling of familiarity. I chalked it up to coincidence, the sheer volume of people I encountered in the city. But then it started happening more frequently. I'd be at the grocery store, and the cashier would have the same piercing blue eyes as a guy named Chad Fitness I'd matched with months ago, a guy who'd sent me a shirtless selfie and immediately been unmatched. I'd be at a coffee shop, and the barista would have the same distinctive nose ring as a girl named Artsy Ava, who'd ghosted me after 2 messages about our favorite painters. These weren't exact replicas, mind you, not perfect twins, but there were undeniable similarities, enough to trigger a jolt of recognition, a faint echo of a digital encounter. It was unnerving, like the algorithm was mocking me, reminding me of the people I'd discarded, the connections I'd failed to make. One night, I was out with friends at a bar, trying to forget the growing unease. The music was loud, the drinks were flowing, and I was actually starting to relax. Then I saw him. Across the room, standing by the pool table, was a man with the same angular jawline and brooding eyes as Dark Poet 87, a guy who'd sent me a series of increasingly unsettling poems before I blocked him. This guy was different, though. He was older, maybe 10 years older, and his eyes lacked the intensity, the almost manic energy that had characterized Dark Poet 87. But the resemblance was undeniable. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I excused myself and went to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. I was being ridiculous, I told myself. It was just a coincidence. There were only so many jawlines in the world, but the feeling persisted. I couldn't shake the image of Dark Poet 87, the creepy poems, the unsettling feeling that he knew more about me than he should have. I went back to my friends, but I couldn't focus on the conversation. My eyes kept drifting back to the man by the pool table. He caught my gaze, and for a split second, a flicker of recognition flashed across his face. He smiled a slow, unsettling smile that sent a shiver down my spine. I turned away, pretending I hadn't seen him. I told my friends I wasn't feeling well and asked them to call me a cab. As the cab pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the bar. He was standing outside, watching me, the same unsettling smile on his face. I didn't sleep that night. The echoes intensified after that. I started seeing these faces everywhere. The delivery guy who brought my pizza had the same lopsided grin as Pizza Lover 69, a guy who tried to sex me unprompted. The woman sitting next to me on the bus had the same fiery red hair as Ginger Snap, a girl who'd confessed to being obsessed with my social media. It was like the people I'd swiped past, the faces I'd dismissed, were now haunting me, their digital presence seeping into the real world. I started to feel like I was being watched, like I was living in a distorted version of reality, where the boundaries between the online and offline had blurred. I tried to talk to my friends about it, but they just laughed it off. "You're just being paranoid," they said. "You're seeing things that aren't there." Maybe they were right. Maybe I was losing it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I was trapped in a digital feedback loop. Then came the message. It was a random text sent from an unknown number. It simply said, "We see you." I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't paranoia. Someone was watching me. Someone knew about my Tinder history. I tried to trace the number, but it was a burner phone. I reported it to the police, but they couldn't do anything without more information. I changed my number, deleted my social media, and went into hiding. I moved to a different city, hoping to escape the echoes. I got a new job, made new friends, and tried to rebuild my life. For a while it worked. The faces faded, the feeling of being watched subsided, and I started to believe that I'd finally left the nightmare behind. But then I saw her. She was sitting at a coffee shop, reading a book. She had the same delicate features and piercing green eyes as Bookworm Bella, a girl who'd sent me a message about a rare edition of my favorite novel, a message that had strangely unnerved me and caused me to unmatch. I froze, paralyzed with fear. She looked up from her book, and her eyes met mine. A slow smile spread across her face, a smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "We've been waiting for you," she said. That's when I ran. I ran as fast as I could, not knowing where I was going, just needing to escape. I don't know who we are or what they want, but I know they're out there, lurking in the shadows, watching me, waiting for the right moment. And I know that the echoes will never truly disappear. They're a constant reminder of the dangers of the digital world, the way our online actions can have unforeseen consequences, the way the people we dismiss can come back to haunt us. I wish someone had warned me about the echoes. I wish someone had told me that the faces I swiped past would eventually resurface, not as fleeting images on a screen, but as real, tangible threats in my life. Because now, I'm living in a constant state of fear, haunted by the ghosts of Tinder, forever looking over my shoulder, wondering when the echoes will catch up to me. It's a chilling reminder that the internet never forgets, and that sometimes the people we meet online can be more dangerous than we ever imagine. So before you download Tinder, remember this story. Remember the echoes. And ask yourself if a few fleeting connections are worth the risk of being haunted forever. I hadn't used Tinder in ages. Not since things had gone south with Mark. That was a whole other level of messed up that I wasn't ready to unpack right now. But I was bored, restless, and frankly lonely. So there I was, swiping through profiles again, half expecting to see Mark's face pop up. He was that kind of petty. Thankfully, the algorithm spared me. That's when I saw Liam. His profile was normal. Refreshingly so. No shirtless gym selfies. No pictures with tigers. Just a couple of decent-looking photos of him smiling. One with a dog. And a bio that said he was a writer and liked hiking. Basic but appealing. We matched instantly. Our initial conversations were easy. We talked about books, movies, our favorite hiking spots, the usual getting-to-know-you stuff. He was witty, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. After a few days of chatting, he suggested we meet up for coffee. I hesitated, a flicker of apprehension creeping in, but I pushed it aside. It had been a long time since I'd put myself out there, and Liam seemed safe. We met at a small coffee shop downtown. He was even more attractive in person, tall, with kind eyes and a disarming smile. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and I found myself laughing more than I had in months. He talked about his writing, a fantasy novel he was working on, and I gushed about my job as a graphic designer. 3 hours flew by, and by the end of it, I was completely smitten. We went on a second date, then a third. We hiked in the mountains, explored hidden bookstores, and spent hours talking over glasses of wine. Liam was everything I thought I wanted. Intelligent, funny, and genuinely caring. He seemed to understand me in a way that no one else ever had. He listened intently when I spoke, remembered small details about my life, and always knew how to make me laugh. Things were moving fast, maybe too fast, but I was caught up in the whirlwind. After a month of dating, he invited me back to his apartment. It was a cozy, well-lit space filled with books and plants. He made dinner, we listened to music, and eventually, we ended up in his bedroom. The sex was amazing, passionate, tender, and deeply connected. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I was on top of the world. I was in love, or at least, I thought I was. Everything felt perfect. Too perfect, maybe. It was after that night that things started to change, subtly at first. Liam became more possessive, more demanding of my time. He started texting me constantly, wanting to know where I was and who I was with. If I didn't respond immediately, he'd call, his voice laced with anxiety. I tried to brush it off as him being affectionate, but his behavior became increasingly controlling. He started criticizing my friends, telling me they weren't good enough for me, that they were holding me back. He'd say things like, "I just want what's best for you," or "I'm just looking out for you." He also started isolating me from my family. He'd make excuses for why I couldn't go to family dinners, or he'd pick fights with me right before I was supposed to visit them, making me feel too stressed to go. Slowly but surely, he was cutting me off from my support system. The red flags were there, waving frantically in my face, but I was too blinded by infatuation to see them. I wanted to believe in the perfect love story, the one where I finally found my soulmate. I didn't want to admit that I might have made a mistake. One evening, I was at his apartment, working on a design project for a client. Liam was sitting next to me, helping by offering unsolicited advice and constantly interrupting my workflow. I was getting frustrated, but I tried to remain patient. "Can you please just let me focus for a little while?" I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. His face darkened. "I'm just trying to help you," he said, his voice tight. "You're always so dismissive of me." "I'm not being dismissive," I said, trying to remain calm. "I just need to concentrate." "No, you're always like this," he snapped. "You never appreciate anything I do for you." The argument escalated quickly. He started yelling, accusing me of being selfish and ungrateful. I tried to defend myself, but he wouldn't listen. He was like a switch had been flipped, and he was someone I didn't recognize. "You're just like all the other women," he spat, his eyes filled with rage. "You use men and then throw them away." I was stunned. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I know what you're up to," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I know you're planning on leaving me." "That's not true," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "I would never do that." "Don't lie to me," he screamed. "I can see it in your eyes." He grabbed my arm, his grip tight and painful. I tried to pull away, but he wouldn't let go. "Let go of me," I said, my voice rising in panic. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his face inches from mine. "You're mine now." That's when I realized the danger I was in. This wasn't just a disagreement. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was something much more sinister. Liam wasn't the kind, caring man I thought I knew. He was controlling, manipulative, and potentially violent. I managed to wrench my arm free from his grip and ran to the door. He lunged after me, but I was faster. I burst out of the apartment and into the hallway, screaming for help. Thankfully, a neighbor heard my cries and came out to investigate. Liam, realizing he'd been caught, backed down and retreated into his apartment. I didn't stick around to find out what he was going to do next. I ran out of the building and didn't stop until I reached a police station. I reported the incident, but the police said there wasn't much they could do without physical evidence of assault. They advised me to get a restraining order, which I did immediately. I moved out of my apartment and went to stay with my sister. I changed my phone number and blocked Liam on all social media. I was terrified that he would find me, that he would try to hurt me. It took months for me to feel safe again. I went to therapy, talked to my friends and family, and slowly began to rebuild my life. The experience left me scarred, but it also made me stronger. I learned to trust my instincts, to recognize the red flags, and to never ignore my gut feeling. I haven't used Tinder since. I'm not sure if I ever will again. The idea of meeting someone online fills me with anxiety. I know that not everyone on Tinder is a monster, but the risk is too high for me. I still think about Liam sometimes, wondering what he's doing, if he's found another victim. I hope not. I hope that one day he'll get the help he needs. But until then, I'll keep my distance, and I'll continue to share my story, hoping that it will help other women avoid the same mistake I made. The mistake of ignoring the red flags, of believing in the perfect love story, and of not realizing the danger therein until it's almost too late. I swiped right more out of boredom than genuine hope. Tinder had become a ritual, a way to pass the time while I waited for the bus, stood in line at the grocery store, or just lay in bed, restless and unable to sleep. Most of the profiles were the same: generic bios, filtered selfies, and the occasional group photo where you had to play spot the D-bag. I wasn't expecting much, just a momentary distraction from the monotony of my day. Then I saw Liam. His profile was different. No gym selfies or boastful descriptions. Just a few candid photos of him hiking, playing guitar, and one of him volunteering at an animal shelter. His bio was simple: looking for someone who appreciates good music, bad jokes, and long walks. It was refreshingly unpretentious, and something about his eyes, kind and a little bit sad, made me swipe right without hesitation. We matched instantly, and within minutes, we were chatting. He was witty, intelligent, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. He asked about my interests, my job, my dreams, and even my fears. It was the kind of conversation I hadn't had in a long time, and I found myself drawn to his vulnerability and his genuine desire for connection. After a few days of nonstop texting, we decided to meet for coffee. I was nervous, but also excited. He seemed too good to be true, but I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this could be something special. The coffee date went better than I could have imagined. He was even more charming in person, with a disarming smile and a gentle demeanor. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, laughing and sharing stories like we had known each other for years. There was a spark, a palpable chemistry that made me feel giddy and hopeful. We went on a few more dates after that: a movie, a concert, a walk in the park. Each time, I fell a little bit harder. He was kind, considerate, and attentive. He listened when I talked, made me laugh until my stomach hurt, and always made me feel safe and valued. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could be myself. I didn't have to pretend to be someone I wasn't or hide my insecurities. He accepted me for who I was, flaws and all, and made me feel like I was worthy of love. We started spending more and more time together, cooking dinner at his apartment, watching movies on the couch, and falling asleep in each other's arms. It felt like we were building something real, something meaningful. I started to imagine a future with him, a future filled with love, laughter, and shared adventures. Then, one night, things took a turn. We were at his apartment, drinking wine and listening to music. It was a cozy, intimate setting, and I felt completely comfortable and relaxed. We were talking about our families, and he started to tell me about his childhood. He grew up in a small town, raised by a single mother. His father had left when he was young, and he had always felt a sense of abandonment and resentment. He spoke about his mother with love and admiration, but also with a hint of sadness. She had worked tirelessly to provide for him, but she had also struggled with her own demons. As he talked, his demeanor started to change. His voice became lower and more intense, and his eyes grew distant and unfocused. He started to ramble, jumping from one topic to another, his thoughts disjointed and illogical. He began telling me about a past relationship that ended badly. He said his girlfriend had cheated on him, leaving him heartbroken and betrayed. He described her in vivid detail, her hair, her eyes, her smile, even the way she smelled. He spoke about her with a mixture of anger and longing, his emotions raw and unfiltered. I tried to comfort him, to reassure him that he deserved better, but he seemed lost in his own world, oblivious to my presence. He started to pace around the room, his movements erratic and agitated. He was no longer the gentle, caring man I had come to know. He was someone else, someone darker and more disturbed. Then, he stopped pacing and turned to me. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, and his face was contorted with rage. He stared at me for a long moment, his gaze intense and unsettling. "You remind me of her," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You have the same hair, the same eyes, the same smile." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to say or do. I was trapped, paralyzed by fear and confusion. He took a step closer, his hand reaching out to touch my face. I flinched, recoiling from his touch. "Don't be afraid," he said, his voice soft and menacing. "I would never hurt you. I just want you to understand." He began to tell me about his plan, a twisted fantasy of revenge and redemption. He wanted to recreate the past, to rewrite the ending of his story. He wanted me to play the role of his ex-girlfriend, to help him heal his broken heart. He said he knew it was crazy, but he couldn't help himself. He said he had been watching me, studying me, learning everything about me. He knew my routines, my habits, my fears. He knew where I lived, where I worked, who my friends were. He had been manipulating me from the very beginning, crafting a persona that he knew would appeal to me. He had used my vulnerability against me, exploiting my desire for connection and my longing for love. I never felt unsafe until that moment, when I realized that the man I thought I knew, the man I had fallen in love with, was a figment of my imagination. He was a carefully constructed illusion, a mask hiding a dark and dangerous truth. I knew I had to get out of there, but I didn't know how. He was blocking the door, his eyes fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. I was trapped, alone with a man who was rapidly losing his grip on reality. I tried to reason with him, to appeal to his sense of humanity, but it was no use. He was too far gone, lost in his own delusional world. Finally, I saw an opportunity. He turned his back for a moment, distracted by a noise outside. I seized the chance, darting past him and running towards the door. He lunged for me, grabbing my arm, but I twisted free and bolted out of the apartment. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't stop running until I reached my own apartment, where I locked the door and collapsed on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my bed, terrified and alone. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching me, that he would come after me. The next morning, I went to the police and told them everything. They took my statement and promised to investigate, but they couldn't do anything without concrete evidence. I knew I had to protect myself. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media accounts, and moved to a new apartment in a different part of the city. I cut off contact with everyone I knew, fearing that he would use them to find me. I lived in a state of constant paranoia, always looking over my shoulder, afraid to trust anyone. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function. I was a prisoner of my own fear. It took me a long time to recover from the trauma of that experience. I went to therapy, joined a support group, and slowly began to rebuild my life. I still use Tinder, but I'm much more cautious now. I'm more aware of the red flags, the warning signs that I missed before. I'm more careful about who I trust and who I let into my life. I'll never forget Liam, or the night that changed everything. It was a painful reminder that not everyone is who they seem to be, and that sometimes the greatest dangers come from those we least expect. It reminded me that a swipe can change your life for good, or for bad. Now I am more wary of people that I met online. I wish someone had warned me about the mirror maze of identity Tinder constructs, the way it subtly chips away at your sense of self until you're not sure who you are anymore, or who you're pretending to be. It started innocently enough, back in 2018. I was fresh out of a long-term relationship, feeling lost and adrift in a sea of newfound singleness. All my friends were coupled up, and the silence in my apartment was deafening. Tinder seemed like the obvious solution, a quick, easy way to fill the void, maybe even find someone new. My initial profile was authentic, I guess. A few candid shots, a bio that was honest about my hobbies and interests. I was looking for someone to share my love of hiking, indie films, and obscure vinyl records with. Naive, right? The matches trickled in at first, a few here and there, mostly guys who seemed nice enough. But the conversations were dull, predictable. Hey, how's your day going? What are you looking for? The usual. I quickly realized that nice enough wasn't going to cut it. I wanted something more exciting, more engaging. That's when the subtle shifts began. I noticed that the guys who swiped right on me seemed to be drawn to certain types of photos. The ones where I was dressed up, smiling brightly, looking conventionally attractive. The photos where I was hiking, reading, or just being myself. Not so much. So, I started posting more of the attractive photos, less of the authentic ones. I tweaked my bio to be more generic, less specific about my interests. Looking for fun. Adventure seeker. Good vibes only. Cliched but effective. The matches started flooding in. I went on a few dates, and they were strange. These guys seemed to be expecting someone different than who I actually was. They were drawn to the image I had created on Tinder, not the real me. I found myself performing, putting on a show, trying to live up to their expectations. I laughed at jokes that weren't funny, pretended to be interested in things I didn't care about, and toned down the parts of my personality that I thought they wouldn't like. It was exhausting. I started to notice these changes seeping into other aspects of my life. I found myself dressing differently, wearing makeup more often, and paying more attention to my appearance. I stopped doing the things I loved, like hiking and going to see indie films, because they didn't fit the image I was trying to project. I was becoming someone else, someone I didn't even recognize. The worst part was, it was working. I was getting more attention, more dates, more validation. I felt like I was finally fitting in, finally being accepted. But underneath the surface, I was miserable. I was living a lie, and the weight of it was crushing me. One night, I was getting ready for a date with a guy I had met on Tinder. I was standing in front of a mirror, meticulously applying makeup, when I stopped and stared at my reflection. Who was this person staring back at me? Was this really me? Or was this just a character I had created for the approval of strangers? The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I was so busy trying to be someone else that I had completely lost sight of who I actually was. I had sacrificed my authenticity, my happiness, for the sake of validation from people who didn't even know me. I canceled the date. I deleted Tinder. I spent the next few months reconnecting with myself, rediscovering the things I loved, and rebuilding my sense of self-worth. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments of loneliness, moments where I questioned if I had made the right decision. But slowly, gradually, I started to feel like myself again. I started hiking again, going to see indie films, and listening to obscure vinyl records. I reconnected with old friends, people who knew and loved the real me. I stopped caring about what other people thought and started focusing on what made me happy. It's been a few years since then, and I'm in a much better place. I'm still single, but I'm okay with that. I'm not desperate for a relationship, and I'm not willing to compromise my authenticity for the sake of finding someone. I've learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of social media and the pressure to conform. Tinder is just one example, but it's a powerful one. It's a platform that encourages us to present a curated version of ourselves, to chase validation through likes and matches, and to lose sight of who we truly are. I wish someone had warned me about this before I downloaded the app. I wish someone had told me that the pursuit of online validation is a hollow and ultimately unfulfilling endeavor. I wish someone had reminded me that true happiness comes from within, not from the approval of strangers. Now I warn anyone considering online dating about how it could negatively affect them. Social media has positives and negatives. You have to be careful what you allow to make its way into your life and what you are willing to share with the world. If you're going to use Tinder or any other social media platform, please be careful. Don't let it define you. Don't let it change you. Don't let it chip away at your sense of self. Remember who you are, what you love, and what makes you happy. And never, ever compromise your authenticity for the sake of validation from strangers. I never thought this would happen to me, but here I am, staring at my phone with a mixture of disbelief and dread, wondering how I let a simple swipe on Tinder turn into the most bizarre and unsettling experience of my life. I've always considered myself a pretty level-headed person, not easily spooked or swayed by outlandish stories. I'm a scientist, for God's sake. I deal in facts and logic, not gut feelings and premonitions. But after what I've been through, I'm starting to question everything I thought I knew about the world and about myself. It started innocently enough. Freshly single after a long and emotionally draining relationship, I decided to dip my toes back into the dating pool. Tinder seemed like the easiest option, quick, convenient, and with a seemingly endless supply of potential matches. I set up my profile, uploaded a few flattering photos, and started swiping. Mostly left, to be honest. The pickings were slim. But then I saw him. Liam. Tall, dark, and handsome, as the cliché goes. His profile was simple, just a few pictures of him hiking, playing guitar, and smiling that charming, slightly crooked smile. His bio was short and sweet. Looking for someone to share adventures with. Bonus points if you like stargazing. I swiped right without hesitation. We matched almost instantly, and he messaged me right away. The conversation flowed easily. We talked about our shared love of nature, our favorite books, and our dreams for the future. He seemed intelligent, witty, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. After a few days of chatting, he suggested we meet up for coffee. I was hesitant at first. I hadn't been on a date in years, and the thought of putting myself out there again was terrifying. But Liam seemed different. He was respectful, attentive, and didn't pressure me in any way. So I agreed. Our first date was perfect. We met at a cozy little cafe in the heart of the city and talked for hours. He was even more attractive in person, with a warm and engaging presence that put me immediately at ease. We laughed, we shared stories, and we discovered that we had so much in common. By the end of the night, I was completely smitten. We saw each other regularly after that. Hiking in the mountains, picnics in the park, late-night movie marathons at my place. He was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Kind, supportive, adventurous, and incredibly attractive. I found myself falling hard and fast. But then things started to get weird. It began subtly at first. Little things that I brushed off as coincidences or quirks. He always seemed to know things about me that I hadn't told him, like the name of my childhood pet, or the title of the book I was secretly writing. He'd bring it up casually in conversation, as if he already knew, and when I asked him how he knew, he'd just smile and say, "I'm a good listener." Then there were the dreams. Vivid, unsettling dreams that felt more like premonitions than random subconscious thoughts. I'd dream about places I'd never been, people I'd never met, and events that were about to happen in my life. And every time I woke up, I had this overwhelming sense that Liam was somehow connected to it all. I tried to talk to him about it, but he always dismissed my concerns. He'd tell me I was just stressed, or that my imagination was running wild. He'd hold me close and tell me everything was going to be okay. And for a moment, I'd believe him, but the feeling of unease never truly went away. One night, we were lying in bed, stargazing through the skylight in my bedroom. We'd been talking about our favorite constellations, and he was telling me about some obscure Greek myth that I'd never heard of. Then he turned to me, his eyes glowing in the dim light, and said, "Do you ever wonder if there's more to the universe than we can see?" I nodded, intrigued. Of course. I'm a scientist, remember? I believe in the possibility of infinite possibilities. He smiled. What if I told you that I knew a way to see beyond the veil, to access a realm of knowledge and power beyond human comprehension? I laughed, thinking he was joking. I'd say you've been reading too much science fiction. But he didn't laugh. His eyes were serious, intense. I'm not joking. I'm telling you the truth. There are forces at play in this world that you can't even imagine, and I have the key to unlocking them. I felt a chill run down my spine. "What are you talking about, Liam?" He reached out and took my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "I can show you. I can show you things that will change your life forever. But you have to trust me." I hesitated. A part of me wanted to run, to scream, to get as far away from him as possible. But another part of me, the part that was still hopelessly in love with him, wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that he was who I thought he was. "What do I have to do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent shivers down my spine. "Just say yes." I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and said the words that would change my life forever. Yes. What followed was a blur of strange rituals, cryptic symbols, and whispered incantations. Liam led me through a series of increasingly bizarre and disturbing practices, claiming that they were necessary to open my mind to the higher realms of consciousness. He had me fasting, meditating for hours on end, and chanting in a language I didn't understand. He introduced me to a group of his friends, who were all equally strange and unsettling. They spoke in riddles, wore odd clothing, and seemed to possess an unnatural knowledge of things they shouldn't know. I started to lose track of time, of reality. The line between dreams and waking life blurred until I couldn't tell the difference anymore. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, a waking hallucination that I couldn't escape. One night, Liam told me that we were ready for the final step. He said that we were going to perform a ritual that would allow us to transcend our physical bodies and enter the realm of the gods. He led me to a secluded clearing in the woods, where his friends had built a makeshift altar out of stones and bones. They were all dressed in black robes, their faces hidden by hoods. The air was thick with incense and the sound of chanting. Liam took my hand and led me to the altar. He laid me down on the cold stone and began to chant in a language that sounded ancient and demonic. His friends gathered around us, their voices rising in a cacophony of sound. I felt a surge of energy coursing through my body, a tingling sensation that started in my toes and spread to the top of my head. Then, everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the forest floor alone. The altar was gone, the clearing was empty, and the sun was just beginning to rise. I felt disoriented, confused, like I'd been through a traumatic experience that I couldn't quite remember. I stumbled back to my car and drove home, my mind racing. What had happened? Was it all a dream? Or had I actually participated in some kind of dark ritual? I spent the next few days trying to piece together the events of the past few weeks. I searched online for information about the rituals Liam had performed, but I couldn't find anything. It was as if he had erased himself from the internet. Then one day, I received a package in the mail. It was a small, unmarked box. Inside, there was a single object, a photograph. It was a picture of me, lying on the altar in the forest, surrounded by Liam and his friends. But there was something different about the picture. In the background, I could see a dark, shadowy figure looming over me, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. I recognized the figure. It was the same figure that I had seen in my dreams, the same figure that I had felt watching me ever since I met Liam. It was a demon. I realized then that Liam hadn't been who I thought he was. He wasn't just a charming, adventurous guy looking for love. He was a cult leader, a manipulator, a servant of dark forces. And I had fallen right into his trap. I don't know what Liam wanted from me, or what his ultimate goal was, but I know that I need to get away from him. I need to protect myself from whatever evil he's unleashed upon the world. I'm changing my name, moving to a new city, and cutting off all contact with everyone I know. I'm starting a new life, far away from the darkness that Liam brought into my life. I never thought this would happen to me, but it did, and I'm sharing my story in the hope that it will serve as a warning to others. Be careful who you trust, especially online. Not everyone is who they seem to be, and sometimes the most charming smiles can hide the darkest secrets, because now I am forever scarred. I should have trusted my instincts the moment I saw his profile. Something about the perfectly curated photos, the overly enthusiastic bio, and the suspiciously vague job description just screamed, too good to be true. But, like a moth to a flame, I swiped right anyway. My Tinder game had been stale lately. A string of boring dates, ghostings, and conversations that fizzled out faster than a cheap firework had left me feeling cynical and defeated. So, when Liam's profile popped up, he seemed like a breath of fresh air. He was handsome, with piercing blue eyes and a charming smile that radiated confidence. His photos showed him hiking in the mountains, volunteering at an animal shelter, and laughing with friends at a beach bonfire. His bio read, adventure seeker, animal lover, and all-around good guy looking for someone to share life's journey with. It was cheesy, sure, but after weeks of dealing with guys who couldn't string together a coherent sentence, I was willing to overlook the corniness. We matched almost instantly, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. He was witty, intelligent, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. He asked about my passions, my dreams, and my biggest fears. He listened attentively and offered thoughtful responses. It was like something out of a rom-com. Within a few days, we were texting constantly, and I found myself looking forward to his messages more than I cared to admit. He suggested we meet up for coffee, and I eagerly agreed. The date was even better than I had imagined. Liam was even more charming in person. He was attentive, funny, and incredibly easy to talk to. We spent hours chatting, laughing, and discovering shared interests. It felt like we had known each other for years. As the date drew to a close, he walked me back to my car and leaned in for a kiss. It was perfect. In the weeks that followed, Liam and I became inseparable. We went on countless dates, explored new restaurants, and spent cozy nights watching movies at home. He seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say, and he always made me feel like the most important person in the world. He was everything I had ever wanted in a partner. But as time went on, I started to notice some cracks in Liam's perfect facade. Small things, at first, that I tried to brush off as quirks or misunderstandings. He was always vague about his job, claiming to be a freelance consultant, but never offering any specifics. He was also incredibly secretive about his past, deflecting any questions about his family or previous relationships. And then there was the possessiveness. At first, it seemed sweet and endearing, like he just wanted to spend all his time with me. But it gradually became more intense, more controlling. He started questioning who I was talking to, where I was going, and what I was doing at all times. He didn't like it when I made plans without him, and he would often guilt-trip me into canceling them. My friends noticed a change in me, too. They said I seemed withdrawn and anxious, like I was walking on eggshells around Liam. They voiced their concerns, but I brushed them off, blinded by my infatuation with him. I wanted to believe that he was the perfect guy I had always dreamed of, and I refused to see the warning signs. One evening, Liam invited me to his apartment for dinner. I had been there before, but something felt different this time. The atmosphere was tense, and Liam seemed unusually nervous. He had cooked a fancy meal, but he barely touched his food. After dinner, he led me to the living room and sat me down on the couch. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice trembling slightly. My heart skipped a beat. I braced myself for the worst. He confessed that he hadn't been entirely honest with me about his job. He wasn't a freelance consultant, he explained. He was actually involved in some shady business dealings that he couldn't go into detail about. He claimed that he was trying to protect me, that he didn't want to involve me in his dangerous life. But the truth was, he was lying to me from the very beginning. I was stunned, betrayed. How could I have been so blind? How could I have fallen for his lies? I stood up and started to walk towards the door. "I need to leave," I said, my voice shaking. "Please don't go," he pleaded, grabbing my arm. "I can explain everything. Just give me a chance." I yanked my arm away and ran out of the apartment. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I drove home in a daze, tears streaming down my face. I spent the rest of the night sobbing, replaying every moment of our relationship in my head, searching for clues that I had missed. The next morning, I woke up feeling numb and empty. I knew I had to end things with Liam, but I was terrified. I didn't know what he was capable of. I decided to meet him in a public place, where I felt safer. I told him that I couldn't trust him anymore, that I couldn't be with someone who was dishonest and secretive. He tried to apologize, to convince me that he could change. But I had made up my mind. I walked away, leaving him standing there alone. In the days that followed, Liam bombarded me with calls and texts, begging me to reconsider. I ignored them all. I knew that I had made the right decision, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I started noticing a strange car parked outside my apartment building. I saw a shadowy figure lurking in the shadows when I walked my dog. I couldn't shake the feeling that Liam was stalking me. I reported my concerns to the police, but they said there wasn't enough evidence to take action. I felt helpless and vulnerable. One night, I came home to find my apartment door ajar. My heart pounded in my chest as I cautiously stepped inside. The apartment was trashed. Furniture was overturned, drawers were emptied, and my belongings were scattered across the floor. Someone had broken in. I called the police, who arrived to investigate. They dusted for fingerprints and took a report, but they didn't find any signs of forced entry, which meant that the intruder had a key. I knew in my heart that it was Liam. He had violated my home, my sanctuary. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I was terrified. I decided to move out of my apartment and stay with a friend until I could find a new place. I changed my phone number and deleted my social media accounts. I wanted to disappear, to erase myself from Liam's life. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, and the return address was unfamiliar. I hesitated before opening it, fearing what it might contain. Inside, there was a single photograph. It was a picture of me, taken without my knowledge, as I was walking my dog in the park. On the back of the photo, there was a message scrawled in black ink. "I'm always watching." I froze. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Liam was still out there, lurking in the shadows, watching my every move. I knew that I would never be truly safe. I realized that I should have trusted my instincts from the very beginning. I should have seen the red flags, the warning signs that Liam was not who he claimed to be. I had been blinded by my desire for love and connection, and I had paid the price. Now, I live in constant fear, always looking over my shoulder, wondering when Liam will strike again. I know that he will never let me go. I am forever haunted by the memory of the man I met on Tinder, the man who turned my life into a living nightmare. I hope that my story serves as a warning to others. Be careful who you trust online. Don't ignore your instincts. And always prioritize your safety. Okay, so, picture this. Me, freshly 24, living in a new city, and convinced that Tinder was the key to unlocking my social life. I had just moved for a job, knew absolutely no one, and my apartment, while cute, echoed with the sound of my own loneliness. I wasn't necessarily looking for the one, more like someone to grab a beer with and not talk about spreadsheets. Tinder seemed like the perfect solution. Swiping became a nightly ritual. The usual suspects popped up: gym selfies, fish pics, guys holding guitars. Why is that a thing? But then there was Liam. His profile was different. No posed photos, no cliches. Just a few candid shots. Him hiking in the mountains, reading a book on a park bench, looking genuinely happy and engaged. His bio was short and sweet. Writer, reader, seeker of interesting conversations. Let's explore the city. Intriguing, right? We matched, and the conversation flowed easily. He wasn't pushy or overly complimentary, just genuinely curious about my life and my interests. We talked about books, movies, music, our shared love for obscure documentaries. He seemed smart, funny, and dare I say, kind of soulful. After a few days of chatting, we decided to meet up for coffee. He suggested this small, independent bookstore cafe near my apartment. Perfect. The date went well. He was just as charming and engaging in person as he was online. We talked for hours, lost in conversation. There was a definite spark, a connection that felt deeper than just casual attraction. We walked around the neighborhood afterwards, talking about our dreams and aspirations. He seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say. He walked me back to my apartment, and we shared a goodnight kiss. It was nice, really nice. In the days that followed, Liam and I became inseparable. We explored the city together, trying new restaurants, visiting museums, attending local concerts. He introduced me to his friends, who were all equally kind and welcoming. I started to feel like I was finally building a life for myself in this new place. I was genuinely happy. But then, little things started to happen. Subtle, almost imperceptible things that, at first, I brushed off as coincidences. He would show up at places I mentioned I was going, even if I hadn't invited him. Like, I'd tell him I was planning to go to a certain farmer's market on Saturday, and he would just happen to be there. He said it was a coincidence, that he loved that market too, but it happened more than once. He started asking about my schedule in detail. What time did I leave for work? What route did I take? When did I usually come home? Again, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just trying to be thoughtful, to plan things around my availability. but it felt invasive. He also started getting weirdly possessive. If I mentioned hanging out with other friends, he would get quiet and withdrawn. He would ask a lot of questions about them, probing for details about our relationship. He never explicitly said I couldn't see other people, but he made it clear that he wasn't happy when I did. Then there was the social media thing. He was constantly tagging me in posts, commenting on all my pictures, and sending me private messages. It was overwhelming. I tried to gently push back, to create some space, but he would get upset and accuse me of not caring about him. I started feeling suffocated. One night, I was scrolling through Tinder, just out of boredom, not even intending to match with anyone, and I saw him. Liam. His profile was still active. It was a gut punch. I confronted him about it, and he swore it was an old profile, that he hadn't used it in months. He said he had just forgotten to delete it. I wanted to believe him, but the doubt had already crept in. I started noticing other inconsistencies in his stories, things that didn't quite add up. He claimed to be a writer, but I never saw him actually writing. He said he lived alone, but I sometimes heard other voices in the background when we talked on the phone. I decided to do some digging. I started with a simple Google search. His name, his picture, his supposed profession. Nothing. It was like he didn't exist online. No social media presence, no publications, no professional website. Nothing. It was incredibly strange. I then went to the library and started searching through old newspapers and magazines, looking for any mention of him or his family. Again, nothing. It was as if he had materialized out of thin air. The more I investigated, the more unnerved I became. It was like he was actively trying to erase his past, to hide something. One evening, I decided to pay him a surprise visit. He had told me he lived in a small apartment complex a few blocks from my place. I walked over there, knocked on his door, and waited. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I could hear music playing inside, so I knew he was home. I tried the doorknob, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. Hesitantly, I opened the door and stepped inside. The apartment was dark and cluttered. Clothes were strewn everywhere. Dishes were piled in the sink, and the air smelled stale and musty. It was nothing like the clean, organized image he had presented to me. As I walked further into the apartment, I noticed something strange. There were pictures everywhere. Pictures of me. Not just the ones I had posted online, but pictures taken from different angles, in different locations. Pictures of me walking to work, sitting in the park, shopping at the grocery store. Pictures that could only have been taken by someone who was following me. My blood ran cold. I turned to leave, but then I saw it. A small, wooden box sitting on a shelf. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside, there was a collection of my personal belongings. A scarf I had lost a few weeks ago, a book I had lent him, a hair tie I had left at his apartment. And then I saw it. A small, Polaroid picture of me sleeping. That's when I knew I had to get out of there. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. I turned and ran, not stopping until I was back in my own apartment, safely behind locked doors. I called the police and told them everything. They took my statement, but they said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. They advised me to stay away from him and to call them if he tried to contact me. I spent the next few days in a state of constant anxiety, jumping at every sound, afraid to leave my apartment. I changed my phone number, deleted all my social media accounts, and installed a security system in my apartment. I felt like I was being watched, like he was always just one step behind me. A week later, the police called me. They had found Liam's apartment empty. He was gone. He had vanished without a trace. They found some disturbing evidence in the apartment, including more pictures of me and a detailed plan outlining his intentions. It was clear that he had been stalking me for weeks, that he had been planning something terrible. They never found him. To this day, I don't know who he was or what he wanted from me. All I know is that I got lucky. I managed to escape before it was too late, but the experience has left me scarred. I'm still afraid to trust people, to let anyone get too close. I deleted Tinder for good, convinced that the promise of connection wasn't worth the risk. It had started so normal, but ended up being a nightmare. The idea that someone can so easily construct a false persona online, infiltrating your life with carefully crafted lies, is truly terrifying. Now, I prefer to meet people the old-fashioned way, through friends, at work, in places where I can actually get a real sense of who they are. The curated reality of dating apps just feels too dangerous, too deceptive. The world isn't a fairy tale, and finding the right person can take a while. The worst feeling in the world would be being with the wrong person. All of that because I decided to swipe right. I wish I could forget what happened that day. It's not a constant, gnawing presence, but it surfaces every now and then, usually late at night when the silence amplifies the echo of bad decisions. It started, like so many other regrettable experiences in my 20s, on Tinder. I was in a weird place then, freshly single after a long, drawn-out relationship that had withered into a comfortable but suffocating routine. I wasn't looking for love, or even a rebound, just something different. A distraction, maybe. Tinder seemed like the easiest way to find it. My profile was generic, a few flattering-ish photos, a self-deprecating bio about being addicted to coffee and bad reality TV. I swiped mindlessly, the whole thing feeling strangely detached, like a game I wasn't particularly invested in winning. Then I matched with him. Liam. His pictures were striking. Not traditionally handsome, but with this intense, almost magnetic energy. Dark eyes, a sharp jawline, and a way of looking at the camera that made you feel like he could see right through you. His bio was short and enigmatic, looking for someone to share a new experience with. My gut twinged with a warning. Something about him felt off, a little too intense, a little too curated. But I ignored it. Curiosity, boredom, maybe a touch of reckless abandon, whatever it was. It pushed me to message him. The conversation started innocently enough. We talked about music, movies, travel. He was intelligent, articulate, and surprisingly funny. He had this way of drawing you in, making you feel like you were the only person in the world he wanted to talk to. The red flags were still there, flickering faintly, but I chose to see them as quirks, as signs of a complex and interesting personality. After a few days of chatting, he suggested we meet. He didn't suggest a bar or a coffee shop, though. He suggested a hike. Specifically, a hike to a remote, abandoned cabin in the mountains a few hours outside of the city. Now, in retrospect, this should have been a deal breaker. Meeting a stranger from Tinder in a secluded location? Recipe for disaster. But I was intrigued. The idea of escaping the city, of breathing fresh air, of having a genuine adventure, it was too tempting to resist. I told a friend where I was going, sent her Liam's profile, and promised to check in regularly. I tried to be responsible, but even then, a part of me knew I was being reckless. I just didn't care enough to stop myself. The drive was long and mostly silent. Liam was focused on the road, his expression unreadable. The landscape shifted from urban sprawl to rolling hills, then to dense forest. As we got further away from civilization, my anxiety started to creep in. The red flags were no longer flickering. They were blazing. The trailhead was unmarked, just a narrow path leading into the woods. Liam led the way, his pace quick and determined. I struggled to keep up, my lungs burning, my legs aching. The silence was broken only by the crunch of our boots on the leaves and the occasional call of a bird. After what felt like hours, we reached the cabin. It was even more dilapidated than I had imagined. The roof was caved in, the windows were boarded up, and the whole structure leaned precariously to one side. It looked like something out of a horror movie. "So," I said, trying to sound nonchalant, "this is it?" Liam smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" He started rummaging in his backpack, pulling out a flashlight, a bottle of water, and a crowbar. "What's that for?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "To get inside," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Inside," I repeated. "But why?" He turned to me, his expression serious. "Because the real experience is inside." That's when I knew I had made a terrible mistake. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to get as far away from this man as possible. But I was paralyzed by fear, trapped in the middle of nowhere with a stranger who was clearly not who he seemed. He started prying at the boarded-up windows, the wood splintering and cracking under the force of the crowbar. I stood there frozen, watching him dismantle the only barrier between me and whatever darkness lay within that cabin. Finally, with a loud crack, the boards gave way. He shone the flashlight into the opening, revealing a dark, musty interior. He turned to me, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "After you," he said, gesturing towards the opening. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, staring at the darkness, my mind racing, trying to figure out a way to escape. "Don't be scared," he said, his voice soft and almost soothing. "It's just an adventure." He reached out and took my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. He started to pull me towards the opening, but I resisted. I yanked my hand away and took a step back. "No," I said, my voice trembling. "I can't do this." His expression changed. The smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold, calculating anger. "What do you mean? You can't do this?" I said, my voice gaining strength, "I'm not going in there." He took a step towards me. His eyes narrowed. "You promised." "I didn't promise anything," I said, backing away. "We had a deal," he insisted, his voice rising. "You said you wanted a new experience." "I changed my mind," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "I want to go home." He lunged at me, grabbing my arm. "You're not going anywhere." I screamed and tried to pull away, but he held on tight. We struggled for a moment, and then, in a surge of adrenaline, I managed to break free. I turned and ran, sprinting back down the path as fast as I could. I could hear him behind me, shouting my name, but I didn't look back. I ran blindly through the woods, tripping over roots and branches, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I didn't stop running until I reached the car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly that I could barely get them into the ignition. Finally, the engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into reverse, spinning out of the parking spot and onto the road. I drove like a maniac, not stopping until I reached the nearest town. I went straight to the police station and told them everything. They took my statement, but they seemed skeptical. They said they would investigate, but they couldn't promise anything. I never heard from them again. I don't know if they ever found Liam, or if he's still out there, luring unsuspecting women into the woods. I try not to think about it. I deleted Tinder that day and haven't looked back since. I'm still single, and maybe I always will be. I'm okay with that. I'd rather be alone than risk another encounter like that. The worst part is, I can't shake the feeling that I was somehow responsible for what happened. I ignored the red flags, I made a series of bad decisions, and I put myself in a dangerous situation. I was lucky to escape, but I know that things could have ended very differently. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder what would have happened if I had gone inside that cabin. What kind of new experience was Liam planning to share with me? I don't want to know. I just want to forget. I wish I could erase that day from my memory, but it's etched in my mind forever, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows of the digital world. A new experience is not worth your life. Trust your gut. Never meet up with someone in an isolated location, especially from Tinder. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but looking back, that initial message from Sarah on Tinder was just off. Not glaringly, obviously wrong, but a subtle dissonance, like a chord played slightly out of tune. It was a simple, "Hey, how's it going?" Standard Tinder fare, but the profile that accompanied it was a collage of generic beauty. Golden blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, a perfect smile plastered across every photo. The pictures felt staged, almost like stock photos, but not quite. There was a glimmer of authenticity hidden beneath layers of filters and careful posing. I was bored, lonely, and admittedly, easily lured in by pretty faces, so I swiped right, and we matched. Our early exchanges were mundane, the usual get-to-know-you questions. "What do you do? What are your hobbies? Where are you from?" I answered honestly, perhaps a little too eagerly. I'd been spending too much time alone, holed up in my apartment, nursing a broken heart and a bruised ego. A connection, even a superficial one through a dating app, felt like a lifeline. Sarah, on the other hand, remained elusive. Her answers were short, vague, and often contradictory. She claimed to be a photographer, but never shared any of her work. She said she loved hiking, but couldn't name any trails she'd actually hiked. It was like she was reading from a script, filling in the blanks with whatever she thought I wanted to hear. But I ignored the red flags, chalking it up to nerves or a quirky personality. I wanted to believe she was real, that someone as seemingly perfect as Sarah could actually be interested in me. So I pushed forward, eager to bridge the gap between our digital personas and the tangible world. After a week of increasingly stilted conversations, I suggested we meet up. Sarah hesitated, offering a series of excuses. She was busy with work. She wasn't feeling well. She had prior engagements. Each excuse was more flimsy than the last, but I remained persistent. I needed to know if she was real, if the connection I thought I felt was genuine, or just a figment of my imagination. Finally, after days of relentless prodding, she relented. "Okay," she wrote, "but let's keep it casual. Coffee, maybe? Somewhere public." I suggested a cafe in the heart of downtown, a bustling spot with plenty of people and bright, open windows. It felt safe, neutral. Sarah agreed, and we set a time for the following afternoon. The day of the date, I was a nervous wreck. I spent hours agonizing over what to wear, what to say, how to act. I wanted to make a good impression, to prove that I was worthy of her attention. I knew, deep down, that something was off about Sarah, but I couldn't shake the hope that maybe, just maybe, she was everything she seemed to be. I arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early, staking out a table near the window. I ordered a coffee and waited, my eyes glued to the entrance. People streamed in and out, but Sarah was nowhere to be seen. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. I checked my phone obsessively, refreshing our Tinder conversation, but there were no new messages. Doubt began to creep in, gnawing at my optimism. Maybe she had changed her mind. Maybe she had found someone better. Maybe she wasn't real at all. Just as I was about to give up, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah. "So sorry I'm late," it read. "Got held up at work. Can you meet me somewhere else? It's closer and it's quieter." A wave of relief washed over me, quickly followed by a prickle of unease. Why the sudden change of plans? Why did she want to meet somewhere quieter? I hesitated, unsure of what to do. I should have listened to my instincts, should have canceled the date then and there. But my desire to meet Sarah, to unravel the mystery that surrounded her, overrode my better judgment. "Where?" I replied, my fingers trembling slightly. She sent me an address, a location on the outskirts of town, far from the bustling city center. It was a deserted industrial park, a wasteland of abandoned warehouses and overgrown lots. "Are you sure that's the right address?" I typed back, my anxiety escalating. "Trust me," she replied. "It's worth it." I stared at the message, my mind racing. Everything about this felt wrong. But I was so close, so tantalizingly close to finally meeting Sarah, to uncovering the truth behind her carefully constructed facade. I made a decision, a foolish, reckless decision that I would come to regret for the rest of my life. I got in my car and drove to the address she had sent. The industrial park was even more desolate than I had imagined. The warehouses were dark and foreboding, their windows boarded up, their walls covered in graffiti. The air was thick with the smell of decay and neglect. I drove slowly through the deserted streets, searching for any sign of Sarah. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. Finally, I saw her. She was standing in front of one of the warehouses, shrouded in shadow. Her golden blonde hair gleamed in the dim light, her blue eyes fixed on me. She looked exactly like her Tinder profile, beautiful and ethereal. I pulled up beside her, my hand shaking as I turned off the engine. I rolled down the window, a nervous smile plastered on my face. "Sarah," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She nodded, her expression unreadable. "I'm so glad you came," she said, her voice soft and melodic. "Me too," I replied, my anxiety slowly dissipating. "I was starting to think you were a figment of my imagination." She chuckled, a low, haunting sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "Oh, I'm very real," she said. "More real than you can possibly imagine." She stepped closer to the car, her eyes locking onto mine. Her perfect smile widened, revealing a row of sharp, pointed teeth. "Now," she said, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper, "let's have some fun." That's when I saw them. Two figures emerged from the shadows behind her, their faces obscured by masks. They were tall and muscular, their bodies clad in dark clothing. They carried weapons, knives and clubs, their eyes glinting with malice. I realized then that Sarah wasn't who she claimed to be. She was a lure, a trap. I had been foolish enough to fall for her deception, and now I was about to pay the price. I slammed the car into reverse, my tires screeching against the asphalt. Sarah and her accomplices lunged forward, their movements swift and predatory. I sped away, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind reeling with terror. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw them chasing after me, their faces contorted with rage. I drove as fast as I could, weaving through the deserted streets, desperately trying to escape their clutches. They were relentless, their pursuit unwavering. Finally, I reached the edge of the industrial park and burst onto the main road. I didn't stop until I reached the city limits, until I was surrounded by the safety of civilization. I never looked back. I went straight to the police station and reported what had happened, but they were skeptical. They said it was likely a prank, a misguided attempt at a scare. They took my statement, but they didn't seem to take me seriously. I knew, however, that it was no prank. Sarah and her accomplices were dangerous, and they were still out there, preying on unsuspecting victims. I deleted my Tinder profile, wiped my social media, and changed my phone number. I moved to a new city, started a new life. I tried to forget what had happened, to bury the memories deep within my subconscious. But the fear never faded. I still see Sarah, S-face in my dreams, her perfect smile masking a dark and sinister intent. I still hear her voice in my nightmares, her words echoing in my ears. I learned a valuable lesson that day, a lesson about the dangers of online dating, the perils of trusting strangers, the importance of listening to my instincts. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but that initial message from Sarah changed my life forever. It shattered my innocence, exposed me to the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of society, and it taught me that sometimes the most beautiful faces hide the most terrifying secrets. I think about the person who might be next. I think about the people that she can get. I hope she is caught. If I hadn't trusted my instincts that day, I genuinely believe I wouldn't be here to tell this story. I've always prided myself on being a good judge of character, the kind of person who can pick up on subtle cues and trust that little voice in the back of their head. But there was a period a few years ago where I ignored every red flag waving in my face, all because I was lonely and craving some kind of connection, and I found myself spiraling down the rabbit hole of a particularly disturbing Tinder match. It started innocently enough, as most Tinder stories do. I had recently moved to a new city for a job and was finding it difficult to meet people outside of work. I swiped idly through profiles, looking for someone who seemed interesting and genuine. I matched with a guy named Alex. His profile was pretty standard, a few pictures of him hiking, one with his dog, and a bio that said he was looking for someone to explore the city with. He seemed normal, harmless even. We started chatting, and he was charming and engaging. He asked about my interests, my job, and what I was looking for in a relationship. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We had a lot in common, or at least that's what he led me to believe. After a few days of chatting, he suggested we meet up for coffee. I hesitated for a moment, a nagging feeling in the back of my mind telling me something was off. But I brushed it aside, telling myself I was just being paranoid. After all, what could possibly go wrong? We met at a small coffee shop near my apartment. He was taller than I expected, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to bore right through me. He was attractive, in a brooding, mysterious kind of way, but there was something about his demeanor that made me uneasy. He was overly attentive, showering me with compliments and hanging on to every word I said. It felt performative, like he was trying too hard to impress me. As we talked, I started noticing inconsistencies in his stories. He would contradict himself, forgetting details he had mentioned earlier. He also asked a lot of personal questions, probing for information about my family, my living situation, and my daily routine. It felt like he was trying to build a profile of me, gathering information for some unknown purpose. Despite my growing unease, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe I was just being overly sensitive. Maybe he was just nervous. But the red flags kept piling up. He kept steering the conversation towards darker topics, talking about his fascination with true crime and his interest in psychology. He even made a few unsettling jokes about stalking and manipulation. It was all subtle, just enough to make me feel uncomfortable without being able to pinpoint exactly why. After the coffee date, he started texting me constantly. He would bombard me with messages throughout the day, demanding my attention and wanting to know my every move. It felt suffocating, like he was trying to control me. I started to distance myself, responding less frequently and trying to avoid him. But he wouldn't take the hint. He kept pushing, insisting that we go out again. One evening, he showed up at my apartment unannounced. I was shocked and terrified. I hadn't given him my address, so how did he find it? He claimed he had figured it out based on clues I had given him during our conversations. It was a blatant lie, and it sent a chill down my spine. I refused to let him in, telling him I was busy and that he needed to leave. He became angry, his charming facade crumbling away to reveal a much darker personality. He started yelling, accusing me of leading him on and demanding that I give him a chance. I stood firm, refusing to back down. Eventually, he stormed off, muttering threats under his breath. I immediately called the police and reported the incident. They took my statement and said they would look into it, but they couldn't do much without more evidence. I felt vulnerable and exposed, knowing that this man knew where I lived and was capable of anything. I spent the next few weeks living in fear, constantly looking over my shoulder and jumping at every sound. I installed extra locks on my doors and windows and bought a can of pepper spray. I was a prisoner in my own home. Despite my efforts to protect myself, Alex continued to harass me. He would call me repeatedly, sending me disturbing messages and leaving threatening voicemails. He even started following me, showing up at my work and my favorite coffee shop. I felt like I was being stalked, and I had no idea how to make it stop. I went back to the police, begging them to do something, but they said there was nothing they could do unless he physically harmed me. I felt helpless and alone, like I was trapped in a nightmare with no escape. I knew I had to take matters into my own hands. I started gathering evidence, documenting every instance of harassment, and saving every message and voicemail. I also started researching Alex, trying to find out more about his past. What I discovered was even more disturbing than I could have imagined. He had a history of stalking and harassing women. He had been arrested multiple times for similar offenses, but he had always managed to avoid serious consequences. He was a predator, and I was his next target. Armed with this information, I went back to the police. This time, they took me seriously. They obtained a restraining order against Alex and started investigating him more thoroughly. A few weeks later, they arrested him for violating the restraining order and for stalking me. The relief I felt was overwhelming. I finally felt safe again, knowing that he was behind bars and could no longer hurt me. But the experience left a lasting scar. I became withdrawn and paranoid, struggling to trust people and constantly fearing that he would come back. It took me a long time to heal from the trauma. I went to therapy, where I learned to process my emotions and develop coping mechanisms. I also started practicing self-defense, empowering myself to protect myself if I ever found myself in a similar situation again. Looking back on it now, I realize how lucky I was. If I hadn't trusted my instincts that day and taken action to protect myself, things could have turned out much differently. I could have become another statistic, another victim of a predator who preys on vulnerable women. This experience taught me the importance of trusting my gut and speaking up when something doesn't feel right. It also taught me that online dating can be dangerous and that it's crucial to be cautious and vigilant. I will never use a dating app again. I'm so grateful I'm still here to share my story with you. The biggest lesson I learned from all of this is that, even in the darkest of times, we have the power to protect ourselves and to overcome adversity. It may take time, but healing is possible, and we can emerge from the ashes stronger and more resilient than ever before. I hope that by sharing my story, I can help other women recognize the red flags and trust their instincts. Don't ignore that little voice in the back of your head. It's often trying to protect you. Stay safe out there, and never underestimate the power of your own intuition. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but matching with Liam on Tinder felt different. I'd been on the app for a solid year, wading through the predictable swamp of gym selfies, fishing pictures, and guys whose opening line was some variation of "Hey, winky face." Liam's profile was refreshingly sparse. One picture, a slightly blurry shot of him leaning against a brick wall, face partially obscured by shadow. His bio was even more intriguing, looking for someone to explore the forgotten corners with. I rolled my eyes, but something about the vague poetry of it piqued my interest. I swiped right. He matched almost instantly. Our initial conversations were surprisingly deep. He wasn't interested in surface-level small talk. Instead, he wanted to know about my fears, my dreams, the things that kept me up at night. He asked about my favorite ghost stories, if I believed in the paranormal, and if I ever felt like I was being watched. It was intense, unsettling even, but I was drawn to it. Maybe I was bored with the mundane. Maybe I was looking for something more. Or maybe I was just naive enough to ignore the red flags waving frantically in my face. We talked for a week before deciding to meet. He suggested a place I'd never heard of, a secluded park on the outskirts of the city rumored to be haunted. Perfect, he said, when I hesitantly agreed. We can explore the forgotten corners together. I should have backed out then. I should have listened to the voice in the back of my head screaming that this was a terrible idea. But I didn't. I was intrigued, curious, and perhaps a little bit flattered that someone so unconventional was interested in me. The park was even more desolate than I imagined. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows across the overgrown paths. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. Liam was already waiting for me at the entrance, leaning against a gnarled oak tree. He was taller than I expected, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to absorb the fading light. He was wearing a long, dark coat that looked out of place in the mild weather. He greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm glad you came," he said, his voice low and husky. "I have something to show you." He led me deeper into the park, away from the main paths and towards a dense thicket of trees. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just a little further," he replied, his grip on my arm tightening slightly. "I promise it's worth it." We eventually arrived at a clearing. In the center stood an old, dilapidated mausoleum, its stone walls covered in moss and graffiti. The iron gate was rusted and hanging open, inviting us inside. "This is it," Liam said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "This is one of the forgotten corners." I hesitated. The mausoleum was creepy, unsettling, and everything about it screamed, "Stay away." But Liam was already heading towards the entrance, and I didn't want to seem like a scaredy cat. I followed him inside. The air inside the mausoleum was cold and damp. The only light came from the sliver of moon visible through the broken roof. Sarcophagi lined the walls, their stone lids cracked and crumbling. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Liam said, his voice echoing in the confined space. "It's interesting," I replied, trying to sound more enthusiastic than I felt. He started pacing around the mausoleum, running his hands along the sarcophagi. "Do you know who's buried here?" he asked. "No," I said. "I didn't even know this place existed until you told me about it." "These are the remains of the Blackwood family," he said, his voice taking on a theatrical tone. "They were the founders of this city, wealthy industrialists who made their fortune in coal mining. But their wealth came at a price. They say they made a pact with the devil to achieve their success." "A pact with the devil?" I scoffed. "That's just a story." "Is it?" Liam said, turning to face me. His eyes were glowing in the dim light. "Or is it a warning?" He started telling me more about the Blackwood family, about their dark secrets, their hidden rituals, and the rumors of madness and death that plagued them. He spoke with such conviction, such passion, that it was hard not to believe him. "They say the spirits of the Blackwood family still haunt this place," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "that they're trapped here, forever bound to this mausoleum." I shivered, despite myself. "You don't really believe that, do you?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, ornate box. He opened it, revealing a collection of strange objects: a dried flower, a lock of hair, a small bone, and a tarnished silver locket. "These belong to the Blackwood family," he said, his eyes fixated on the objects. "They're imbued with their energy, their essence." He picked up the silver locket and held it out to me. "Here," he said. "Hold it. Feel the energy." I hesitated. The locket looked old and sinister. I didn't want to touch it, but Liam's gaze was intense, hypnotic. I reluctantly took the locket from him. As soon as my fingers brushed against the cold metal, I felt a jolt of energy surge through my body. It was like an electric shock, both exhilarating and terrifying. I gasped and dropped the locket to the ground. "What was that?" I asked, my voice trembling. Liam smiled. "You felt it, didn't you?" he said. "The power of the Blackwood family." He picked up the locket and placed it back in the box. "They're still here," he said, his voice barely audible. "They're watching us." I wanted to leave. I wanted to run as far away from that mausoleum as possible. But I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. Suddenly, the temperature in the mausoleum dropped dramatically. A gust of wind swept through the broken roof. extinguishing the moonlight and plunging us into darkness. The air grew heavy, suffocating. I could hear whispers all around me, faint and unintelligible, but growing louder with each passing second. "They're here," Liam said, his voice filled with awe. "They've come to greet us." I screamed. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a vortex. I felt a cold hand touch my arm, and then another on my face. I tried to pull away, but I was surrounded by unseen forces. Liam was laughing, a high-pitched, manic laugh that echoed through the mausoleum. "Welcome," he shouted, his voice distorted and unnatural. "Welcome to the Blackwood family." I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the worst. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The whispers faded, the cold dissipated, and the moonlight returned. The air cleared, and I could breathe again. I opened my eyes. Liam was standing in front of me, his face pale and sweaty. The box was gone. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice sounding strangely normal. I didn't answer. I was too terrified to speak. He reached out to touch me, but I flinched away. "What was that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What just happened?" He looked confused. "What do you mean?" he said. "Nothing happened. We were just exploring the mausoleum." "No," I said, shaking my head. "There were whispers and cold, and you were laughing." He frowned. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "You must be imagining things. This place can play tricks on your mind." I didn't believe him. I knew what I had experienced. I knew that something terrible had happened in that mausoleum. "I want to go home," I said, my voice trembling. He didn't argue. He led me out of the mausoleum and back to the park entrance. We walked in silence, the tension between us thick and suffocating. When we reached my car, he turned to me. "I had a really great time tonight," he said, his eyes searching mine. "I hope we can do it again sometime." I stared at him in disbelief. "Are you insane?" I said. "I'm never seeing you again." I got into my car and drove away, leaving him standing alone in the darkness. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the events of the evening in my head, trying to make sense of what had happened. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something terrible. The next day, I tried to find out more about the Blackwood family. I searched online, but there was very little information. The only thing I could find was a brief mention in an old historical document, referring to them as a family shrouded in mystery and misfortune. I also tried to find Liam on Tinder, but his profile was gone. He had vanished without a trace. I never saw or heard from him again. But I'll never forget my night in the haunted park. It was a terrifying reminder that not everyone on Tinder is who they seem to be, and that sometimes the forgotten corners are best left unexplored. I still think about that night sometimes. I wonder who Liam really was and what his intentions were. Was he just a harmless eccentric with a fascination for the paranormal? Or was he something more sinister, something evil? I don't know the answer, and I don't think I ever will. But one thing I do know is that I'll never swipe right on a blurry picture again. The worst part, a few weeks later, I started having nightmares. Nightmares about the mausoleum, the whispers, and the cold. Nightmares about Liam, his eyes glowing in the dark, his voice filled with madness. And in every dream, I could feel the weight of the silver locket in my hand and the jolt of energy surging through my body. I could